In the wilds of 1847 Montana, a young rancher named Ezra Thompson faces a harsh winter alone, struggling to keep his father's legacy alive. But when he unexpectedly gives his jacket to a cold native woman named Diana, his world changes forever. What happens next will not only test his courage, but also challenge everything he thought he knew about survival, respect, and the power of kindness. 100 warriors appear at his door, and soon, Ezra learns the true meaning of community and the land. Will he rise to the challenge, or lose everything his father built? Watch this captivating journey unfold, and don't forget to drop your thoughts in the comments. If you love stories about unexpected connections and life-changing lessons, make sure to subscribe for more. The year was 1847, and winter had taken full hold of the Montana Territory. The wind howled through the barren landscape, biting at the skin with a ferocity that made even the hardiest ranchers cringe. Ezra Thompson, a young man of 22, tightened his wool jacket around his shoulders as he rode his mare, Belle, along the frozen creek bed that marked the eastern boundary of his modest 300-acre ranch. The winter cold had dug deep into the bones of the land, and Ezra, though born into this environment, had never fully grown accustomed to its relentless chill. Ezra had inherited the ranch from his late father, Samuel Thompson, just 6 months ago. His father had built this ranch from nothing, surviving Indian raids, cattle rustlers, and the harshest of winters. But Ezra felt inadequate. He had been more of a bookkeeper than a rancher, spending most of his time with numbers rather than livestock. Now, with the weight of his father's legacy on his shoulders, he often wondered if he was tough enough to hold on to it. As Ezra rode along the familiar trail, the sound of Belle's hooves crunching through the frozen earth was the only noise breaking the cold silence. The landscape stretched out before him, vast and empty, just as it had always been. But today, something was different. As he approached the old oak tree, a landmark for travelers and ranchers alike, he saw a figure huddled against the base of the tree. It was a young native woman, likely no older than himself, shivering in the bitter cold. Her dress, though beautifully crafted from buckskin and adorned with intricate beadwork, offered little protection against the frigid temperatures. Her skin was pale from the cold, and her lips had already started to turn blue. Ezra's heart twisted in his chest at the sight. Without a second thought, he dismounted and removed his father's wool jacket, the one that had been crafted from their own sheep's wool and woven by a local seamstress. It was thick, warm, and lined with flannel sewn by his late mother, a gift that had always kept him warm in the harshest of winters. He knew giving it away meant he would be cold on his way home, but he could not leave her out in the freezing weather. "Miss," Ezra said, his voice low and gentle, "you'll freeze out here without proper covering." The woman looked up at him, her dark eyes watching him with an intensity that surprised him. There was no fear in her gaze, only curiosity and perhaps a hint of caution. Ezra held the jacket out to her, keeping a safe distance. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly accepted the jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The relief in her posture was immediate. Her body, which had been rigid from the cold, relaxed slightly as warmth returned to her limbs. "Thank you," she said softly in clear English, though with an accent Ezra had never heard before. It was melodic, with a cadence he had never expected from a native person. Ezra was taken aback by her fluency in English, as many in the territory did not speak it well, relying instead on interpreters or hand gestures when interacting with settlers. She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and something else, something that Ezra couldn't quite place. Her dark hair, now pulled away from her face by the wind, fluttered around her like a dark cloud. He felt an unexpected connection in that moment. "There's a trading post about 5 miles west," he said, his voice still soft but offering a kind suggestion. "Old Murphy keeps a warm fire and serves hot coffee to anyone who needs it." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. It was as if she was trying to read his intentions. Finally, she gave a faint smile, though it was fleeting, before she spoke. "I know Murphy. He is a good man." Ezra's cheeks warmed with a hint of embarrassment, though he wasn't sure why. He had meant no harm in his words, but something about her calm and measured tone made him feel as though she had seen right through him. She adjusted the jacket around her shoulders and began to walk away, her movements graceful despite the cold. Before she was out of earshot, she turned back to him and said quietly, "I am called Ayana. It means eternal blossom in my language." Ezra touched the brim of his hat, an old habit his father had taught him when meeting women. "Ezra Thompson," he said respectfully, tipping his hat slightly. And I hope you don't mind me saying, it's a beautiful name." Ayanna paused for a moment, and Ezra could see something shift in her expression. Perhaps surprise, or maybe something warmer. She nodded and gave him a small, sincere smile. "Thank you, Ezra Thompson," she said, before turning and disappearing into the distance, her figure growing smaller and smaller against the vast Montana wilderness. Ezra stood there for a moment, still holding the reins of Belle, the cold beginning to seep through his jacket. His heart beat a little faster than it had before, and his thoughts lingered on Ayanna. Who was she? Why had she been out here, alone in the cold? He hadn't expected to see her again, but something told him that their paths would cross again. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the sun rising over the snow-covered plains. The cold, however, still gripped the land, and Ezra felt it biting through his worn leather chaps as he went about his morning chores. The barn was full of hay, and the cattle needed to be fed. Belle, who had been unusually restless the day before, seemed a little more at ease now. But something still felt off. Ezra entered the barn and went to work feeding his small herd of cattle. His hands moved quickly, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Ayanna. There was something about her, something in the way she had carried herself, even in the cold. It wasn't just the beauty of her appearance, it was something deeper, something Ezra couldn't fully understand. His father had always warned him about getting involved with the native people. He said they were unpredictable, dangerous. But Ayanna, she had been different. As Ezra finished his chores, Belle began to whinny nervously again, her ears flicking back and forth as if she sensed something Ezra didn't. He paused and listened, but there was nothing. The wind howled across the open land, but it was eerily quiet otherwise. The silence hung in the air, thick and oppressive. Ezra walked outside, wiping his hands on his chaps. That's when he saw them. Across the horizon, a line of riders appeared, more than 100 of them, moving in perfect formation. They were mounted on horses that seemed as still and poised as their riders, and as they drew closer, Ezra's heart began to race. The warriors were dressed in elaborate clothing, their horses painted with vibrant colors, and their faces unpainted for war. This was no raid, these weren't enemies. But Ezra had never seen so many native warriors gathered in one place. His mind raced with questions. Why were they here? What did they want? As the warriors drew nearer, Ezra's legs went cold, and he felt the air around him grow heavier. He had heard stories of raids, of destruction, of fear. But these men weren't here for battle. They weren't here to harm him. As their horses drew up to his fence, the riders sat perfectly still, their eyes watching him with a quiet intensity. And then, at the center of the line, Ezra saw him, standing bare. Ezra stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as the line of warriors stretched across his fence. Their stillness was unnerving, like a row of statues carved from stone, their eyes fixed on him with a quiet, almost ceremonial intensity. There were no weapons raised, no signs of aggression. But Ezra couldn't shake the tension in the air. It was thick with anticipation, with something that felt both magnificent and terrifying. His eyes shifted from one rider to the next, trying to make sense of their movements, their intentions. It was then that he saw the man at the center of the group. He rode with a dignity and authority that stood out among the others. His attire was more elaborate than the rest, adorned with a headdress made from eagle feathers, a symbol of his status as their leader. The chief's presence was commanding, and Ezra instinctively knew that this man was someone of great importance. The chief raised his hand, and the warriors fell into complete silence. It was as if the entire world had paused for a moment, holding its breath. Ezra swallowed hard, his mind racing. Should he run to the cabin? Should he take cover? What should he do? But before Ezra could make up his mind, the chief's gaze shifted directly to him. His eyes were sharp and wise, and for a brief moment, Ezra felt as though the chief could see straight through him. There was no fear in the chief's eyes, only a deep understanding, as though this moment had been written long before Ezra was born. The chief gestured toward him, and a low murmur rippled through the warriors. The tension in the air seemed to grow even heavier, but there was no hostility in the chief's movements. Slowly, the chief dismounted from his horse, his steps purposeful and measured, and walked toward Ezra with an air of quiet authority. Ezra's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary encounter. This was something deeper, something beyond his understanding. As the chief drew nearer, Ezra could hear the steady sound of his footsteps crunching in the snow. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the rugged appearance of someone who had seen many winters. His face, though weathered by age, carried a quiet strength that commanded respect. The chief stopped in front of Ezra, his eyes never leaving his. "You are the one who gave warmth to my daughter," the chief's voice rumbled, deep and steady. It was the first time Ezra had heard him speak, and the words carried a weight that made Ezra's stomach tighten. Ezra opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He had expected anger, perhaps a confrontation, but not this. Not this deep, respectful acknowledgement. The chief's gaze softened for a moment, and he spoke again, this time in a voice that held a trace of warmth. "My name is Standing Bear. I lead the Lakota tribe in this land." Standing Bear looked Ezra over carefully, sizing him up. "Your kindness to my daughter, Ayanna, has not gone unnoticed. It is rare to see such generosity from those outside our people." Ezra swallowed, trying to find his voice. I didn't think much of it," he stammered, feeling out of his depth. "She was cold. I couldn't leave her like that." Standing Bear studied him for a long moment. Then, with a slow nod, he gestured to the warriors behind him. "You have shown us something we do not often see. We have come to meet the man who would give warmth to a stranger." Ezra's heart skipped a beat. He had given his jacket to a woman in need, nothing more, nothing less. But in the eyes of Standing Bear and his people, it had become something far more significant. Something that transcended the simple exchange of clothing. Ayanna, who had been standing quietly beside her father, stepped forward. She had changed into a new set of clothes, more elaborate and finely made than what she had worn before. Her long dark hair was braided, adorned with feathers and beads that shimmered in the cold light of the morning. She walked toward Ezra, her movements graceful and calm. There was a dignity in the way she carried herself, as though she had already accepted the weight of her people's customs. Ayanna was no longer the shivering girl he had found by the oak tree. She was someone of importance, someone who carried the traditions of her tribe with pride. As she reached him, Ayanna's eyes met Ezra's with a sense of quiet understanding. She held out the jacket he had given her, now cleaned and mended, looking almost new. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady. "You showed kindness when it was needed most." Ezra reached out and took the jacket from her, the weight of the gesture settling heavily in his chest. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected his simple act of compassion to be met with such respect. Standing Bear stepped forward, his voice low and grave. "We do not forget acts of kindness," he said. "This is not the way of the world today, but it is the way of our people. We honor those who show respect to others, regardless of the differences between them." Ezra nodded slowly, the weight of the chief's words sinking in. He had never thought about it like this, never considered that a single act of kindness could have such far-reaching consequences. Ayanna turned to him once more, her eyes thoughtful. "You have given my father something precious," she said quietly. "Not just warmth for my body, but hope for my spirit. In these times, that is something rare." Ezra's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. He had only given her a coat to keep her warm. How had it become something so profound? Standing Bear turned to the warriors behind him and spoke in a language Ezra did not understand. The warriors, one by one, dismounted from their horses and began to move, their eyes still fixed on Ezra. But there was no aggression in their movements. Instead, they were purposeful, intent on something Ezra could not yet comprehend. Ezra stood motionless, still processing the unexpected turn of events. The air felt thick with unspoken words, as if everything that had transpired so far was leading to something even greater. Standing Bear, the chief of the Lakota, had acknowledged his kindness in a way that Ezra had never anticipated, and now the warriors were moving with purpose, their actions deliberate and focused. The warriors began to work with quiet efficiency, gathering tools from their packs. Some carried traditional implements, while others had clearly acquired metal tools from white settlers. Ezra watched in silence, unsure of what to expect next. Ayanna stepped closer to him, her expression calm, but there was a glimmer of something else in her eyes, a knowing, perhaps, that things were about to change for him in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. She gestured to the warriors as they began to repair the broken sections of his fence and inspect his barn, their movements practiced and swift. "Your ranch," Ayana said softly, "has need of repair before the winter snows arrive. The winds here can be harsh, and the cold will make it harder to keep things intact. My people are skilled in the ways of this land. We know how to survive it." Ezra opened his mouth to protest, but Ayana continued. "This is not a payment for your kindness, Ezra. It is simply what we do. In our culture, we help each other. When someone shows us kindness, we offer what we can in return." Ezra felt overwhelmed. He had never expected such generosity, let alone from the people his father had warned him to avoid. The idea that these native warriors, once considered enemies in his mind, were here to help him, to improve his ranch, was something he had never thought possible. Standing Bear approached him once again, his eyes steady but filled with something Ezra couldn't quite place. The chief's voice was deep and deliberate as he spoke. "You do not know what it means to be part of something greater than yourself," Standing Bear said, his words carrying a weight that made Ezra's chest tighten. "This land is not just yours. It belongs to all of us, those who came before us, and those who will come after." Ezra felt the significance of the chief's words. His father had built this ranch from the ground up, but now, standing here among these warriors, he realized that ownership was not as simple as it seemed. There was a connection to the land that ran deeper than just cattle and crops. It was a bond, a responsibility to care for it, to preserve it. "We help each other because we understand the hardships of this life," Standing Bear continued, looking over the land with an almost wistful expression. "The winters are harsh, and the land provides only what it can. We all must learn to survive it together." Ezra nodded slowly, beginning to grasp the depth of what the chief was saying. The Lakota tribe had lived on this land for generations, enduring the same harsh winters, the same struggle to survive. And now, they were offering to help him, not out of charity, but out of a sense of shared responsibility. As Standing Bear spoke, the warriors had already begun to work on the fence, replacing rotted posts with fresh timber. Others had climbed onto the roof of Ezra's barn, working with the same skill and precision that Ezra had only seen from professional craftsmen in town. The work was getting done faster and more efficiently than Ezra could have ever managed on his own, and he found himself in awe of the warriors' skill and unity. Ayana, still by his side, offered him a small smile. "You will be prepared for the winter now," she said, her tone reassuring. "We have done what we can to make sure your ranch can withstand the harsh months ahead." Ezra stood silently, taking in the sight of the warriors working together, their focus unbroken. He had never seen anything like this. People from different worlds, different cultures, coming together for a common purpose. As the day wore on, the work continued with remarkable efficiency. The warriors, though few in number, moved with a collective purpose, repairing sections of the fence, reinforcing the barn, and ensuring that Ezra's property would be ready for the brutal winter ahead. Ezra had never seen such dedication to a task, and it humbled him. Ayana had stayed by his side, offering him guidance on how to better manage his land. She shared with him tips on surviving the harsh winters, how to build windbreaks for the cattle, where to place hay bales to protect against the biting winds, and the best ways to track weather patterns. The more she spoke, the more Ezra realized how little he truly knew about the land he was trying to manage. At one point, Ayana led him to a small group of warriors who were preparing to teach him a vital skill: how to track the movement of animals during the winter months. She explained that, in their culture, hunting was not just a means of survival. It was a way to connect with the land, to understand its rhythms and secrets. "Tracking is about more than just finding food," Ayana said as she crouched next to a set of animal tracks in the snow. "It's about learning the language of the earth. The way the animals move, the way the wind shifts. It all tells a story." Ezra listened closely as she explained the signs to look for. How to tell the difference between the tracks of a deer and a buffalo, how to read the subtle changes in the snow that could indicate the presence of predators. It was a world Ezra had never considered, a way of thinking that connected him to the land in a way he had never experienced. Later that evening, as the sun began to set and the warriors finished their work, Standing Bear called Ezra over. The chief stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land with a contemplative expression. "You have learned much today, Ezra Thompson," Standing Bear said, his voice deep and measured. "But there is much more to understand. This land, these people, and the challenges we face are all part of the same story. If you wish to survive here, You must learn not only to live off the land but to respect it." Ezra nodded, his mind filled with the weight of Standing Bear's words. He had always thought of himself as a rancher, as someone who simply worked the land. But now, standing next to the chief, he realized that there was more to it than that. This land was a living thing, full of history, wisdom, and knowledge that he had yet to fully understand. The days passed in a flurry of activity as Ezra's ranch slowly transformed. The warriors worked tirelessly, repairing fences, reinforcing the barn, and building windbreaks for the cattle. With every task completed, Ezra's confidence grew. The ranch, which had once seemed like a heavy burden, was now taking shape with the care and precision of the Lakota warriors. But it wasn't just the physical work that Ezra found himself learning from. He began to understand the rhythm of the land, the way the wind whispered through the trees, the patterns of the animals, and the subtle changes in the weather that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. Ayanna had become not just a guide, but a friend. Her patience in teaching him was something Ezra had never experienced before. She never treated him like a novice. Instead, she treated him as an equal, a partner in learning. One evening, after a long day of work, Ayanna and Ezra sat around the campfire with the other warriors. The fire crackled and popped, casting a warm glow on their faces. The stars above them were clear and bright, the air crisp with the bite of the approaching winter. As the warriors shared stories in their native tongue, Ayanna translated for Ezra, offering him glimpses into a world that was both foreign and familiar. The stories they told were filled with wisdom, tales of ancestors, of the land, and of the cycles of nature that had sustained the Lakota for generations. Ezra listened intently, captivated by the depth of their knowledge. He had always thought of history as something written in books, something that could be learned through study. But here, around this fire, he realized that history was living and breathing, passed down through the generations in the form of stories and lessons. That night, as he lay in bed, Ezra thought about the bond that had begun to form between him and the Lakota. He had once feared them, viewed them as a distant, foreign people. But now, he saw them as something more. He saw them as part of a community, a people who understood the land in ways he could never have imagined. They had welcomed him, a stranger, into their fold. And in return, they had shown him what it meant to truly live with the land, not just on it. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and learning. Ayanna continued to teach Ezra the skills he needed to thrive on the land, and Ezra began to apply what he had learned, finding new ways to manage his cattle and improve his ranch. The warriors continued to help, their presence a steady source of support and guidance. Ezra's connection with Ayanna grew deeper with each passing day. Their conversations, once brief and polite, began to extend into the evening as they shared stories of their pasts. Ayanna told Ezra about her childhood, about growing up in the Lakota tribe, and the lessons she had learned from her father, Chief Standing Bear. She spoke of the struggles her people had faced over the years, losses that were both physical and spiritual, as their way of life was threatened by the encroaching settlers. But she also spoke of hope, of the strength of her people and the belief that they would endure. Ezra, in turn, spoke of his own life. He told her about his father, Samuel Thompson, and the ranch he had built from the ground up. He shared his doubts about his ability to continue his father's legacy, his fears that he was too soft, too inexperienced to survive in this harsh world. "You are stronger than you think," Ayanna said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Your father's strength lives in you, in the way you care for this land. You may not see it yet, but you have the heart of a true rancher." Ezra met her gaze, the warmth of the fire reflecting in her eyes. Her words touched something deep inside him, something he had been too afraid to acknowledge. It was true, he had inherited more from his father than just the land. He had inherited his father's resilience, his ability to endure, even when things seemed impossible. For the first time since his father's death, Ezra began to feel a sense of pride in his work. The land that had once felt like a burden was slowly becoming something he could call his own. And in Ayanna's company, he began to realize that he wasn't alone in this journey. He had the support of the Lakota, of Standing Bear, and of Ayanna herself. As the days grew colder, their connection continued to deepen. Ezra began to see Ayanna not just as a teacher or a guide, but as someone who had become a part of his life, someone he could rely on. The bond they shared was something that transcended race, culture, and background. It was a connection built on respect, understanding, and a shared love for the land. One day, as Ezra worked in the barn, he noticed Standing Bear walking toward him, his posture as dignified as ever. The chief's presence was commanding, and Ezra felt a sense of reverence whenever he spoke. Standing Bear stopped in front of Ezra, his eyes steady and wise. "You have learned much from my daughter," the chief said, his voice deep and calm. "But there is more you must understand if you are to survive here. The land, the seasons, and the animals, they are all part of a greater balance. To survive, you must learn to listen to it, to become a part of it." Ezra nodded, taking in the chief's words. He had learned a great deal from Ayanna and the warriors, but there was still so much he didn't understand. He had always seen the land as something to conquer, something to tame. But now, standing before Standing Bear, he realized that the land was not something to conquer. It was something to understand, to work with, and to respect. "You must learn the language of the land," Standing Bear continued. "The wind, the animals, the soil, they all speak. If you listen closely, they will tell you what you need to know." Ezra stood in silence, absorbing the chief's wisdom. It was a lesson he had never been taught by his father. Samuel Thompson had been a man of action, a man who worked hard and demanded results. But Standing Bear's words were about patience, about understanding the rhythms of nature and working in harmony with it. "I will listen," Ezra said quietly, his voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose. Standing Bear gave him a small nod of approval before turning to leave. "Good. The land will teach you, if you are willing to learn." As the chief walked away, Ezra felt something stir inside him. For the first time since he had inherited the ranch, he felt truly connected to it. This land was no longer just his father's legacy, it was his own now. And he was ready to learn, ready to embrace the wisdom of the Lakota people and the land that sustained them. The months passed, and winter began to tighten its grip on the land. The snow covered the rolling hills, and the wind howled across the vast Montana plains, pushing through every crack and crevice. But Ezra's ranch, once vulnerable and struggling, had become more resilient. Thanks to the help of Ayanna and the Lakota warriors, his barn was sturdy, his fences were reinforced, and his livestock was protected by the windbreaks they had taught him to build. Each day, Ezra worked side by side with the warriors, learning new techniques for surviving the harsh winters. He had never been the most physically strong, but he had learned to be resourceful. The harsh landscape no longer intimidated him. Instead, it challenged him, and he rose to meet it. Ayanna continued to teach him the ways of the land, showing him how to read the weather, how to predict the changes in the wind, and how to identify the signs of an approaching storm. One evening, as the first snowstorm of the season rolled in, Ezra and Ayanna sat by the fire, watching the snowflakes swirl outside. The warmth of the fire felt like a blessing against the freezing air outside, but there was an uneasiness in the air, an anticipation of the storm. Ayanna looked at him thoughtfully. "The storm will be hard," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We will need to move the cattle to the sheltered areas before it gets worse." Ezra nodded, already aware of what needed to be done. He had learned enough to know that the worst of the storm would arrive before dawn. The cattle would need to be moved quickly to avoid the worst of the cold. Together, they went out into the snowstorm, working quickly to herd the cattle into the barn. The wind cut through them, but Ezra barely felt it anymore. The lessons Ayanna had taught him had made him tougher, more capable. As they finished moving the last of the cattle into the barn, Ezra felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The storm would be fierce, but he knew his animals were safe. Back inside, they huddled by the fire, the storm raging outside. Ayanna handed Ezra a cup of warm tea, the steam rising into the cold air. "You are learning well," Ayanna said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Soon, this land will be yours, just as it was your father's. You will not be afraid of it anymore." Ezra took the cup from her, feeling the warmth seep into his hands. He had come a long way since that cold winter day when he had given Ayanna his jacket. His confidence had grown, but more than that, his understanding of the land had deepened. "I couldn't have done it without you," Ezra said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You've shown me more than I ever could have learned on my own." Ayanna smiled, her eyes soft. "We help each other, Ezra. That is how we survive." The words stayed with him long after the storm had passed, long after the fire had burned low. There was more to survival than just the land. It was about community, about sharing knowledge, and about standing together when times were tough. As spring slowly began to break through the heavy winter, the ranch began to feel alive again. The snow melted, revealing the fertile earth beneath. The cattle grazed peacefully, and the air was filled with the sound of birds returning to their nests. Ezra, who had once feared the harshness of the land, now felt a sense of peace settle within him. The work wasn't easy, but it was rewarding in a way he had never expected. One afternoon, Standing Bear arrived at the ranch with a small group of warriors. As usual, he carried himself with the dignity of a leader, but there was something different in his demeanor today. He was accompanied by a man Ezra hadn't seen before, an elder who looked older than Standing Bear, with deep lines on his face and a calm yet commanding presence. Standing Bear approached Ezra with a small smile, something Ezra had rarely seen on the chief's face. "I have come to speak with you about something important," Standing Bear said. Ezra listened closely, his curiosity piqued. He had learned that Standing Bear did not speak lightly, and when he did, his words held great weight. The chief gestured to the elder beside him. "This is Running Bear, an elder of our tribe. He has lived on this land for many years and has seen much. He has asked me to invite you to our winter camp, to learn from the elders and understand more about our traditions and our history." Ezra was taken aback by the invitation. He had heard of the Lakota's winter camps, places where families gathered to share stories, wisdom, and knowledge passed down through generations. It was a rare honor to be invited, especially by an elder like Running Bear. "I would be honored," Ezra said, though a wave of uncertainty swept over him. The idea of leaving his ranch, his land, felt strange. He had spent so long learning how to manage it, how to survive. But he realized that there was still much he didn't understand, much he could learn from the Lakota. Standing Bear's eyes softened, as if he had anticipated Ezra's hesitation. "It is a journey of the spirit as much as the body," the chief said. "To understand the land, we must also understand the people who have lived on it for centuries. The winter camp will teach you this, Ezra." Ezra looked at Ayanna, who stood quietly by her father's side. She met his gaze with a small, encouraging smile. "You will learn much, Ezra," she said softly. "This is an opportunity to connect with the land in a way that few ever will." Ezra nodded slowly, a sense of anticipation building within him. It was an invitation to not only learn more about the Lakota, but to understand the deeper connection between the land and its people, something he had only begun to scratch the surface of. He turned back to Standing Bear. "When do we leave?" The chief smiled, his face softening with pride. "We leave tomorrow." The journey to the Lakota winter camp was long and arduous. Ezra had never ventured far from his ranch, and the trip took him into unfamiliar territory, through deep snowdrifts and treacherous mountain passes. But as they traveled, Standing Bear and the other warriors guided him, sharing stories along the way about the land, the animals, and the history of their people. Ezra listened intently, absorbing everything he could. The cold was biting, but it felt different this time. The harshness of the winter winds no longer felt like an enemy to be fought. Instead, Ezra began to understand it as a part of the landscape, an element that had shaped the lives of those who had lived here for generations. When they arrived at the camp, the sight took Ezra's breath away. The valley was nestled between two towering peaks, offering natural protection from the wind. Dozens of teepees were set up in a large circle, smoke rising from cooking fires, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was a vibrant, peaceful community, full of life even in the dead of winter. Ezra dismounted from Bell, feeling the ground beneath him in a way he never had before. This was a sacred place, a space where generations of the Lakota had gathered to share knowledge, to tell stories, and to bond as a community. He felt like an outsider, but at the same time, he felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. Standing Bear motioned for Ezra to follow him. As they walked toward the center of the camp, the warriors and elders greeted them with quiet nods of respect. It was clear that Standing Bear was a leader here, and his presence was powerful, but it was the community's warmth that Ezra felt most. They reached a large fire in the center of the camp, where several elders sat, waiting for them. The eldest of the group, a woman with silver hair and a face weathered by time and experience, looked up at Ezra with sharp, knowing eyes. She smiled gently. "Welcome, Ezra Thompson," she said in a voice as soft as the wind. "You have traveled far to be here. We are honored to have you with us." Ezra nodded, humbled by her greeting. "I am honored to be here," he replied, his voice steady but filled with awe. The elder gestured to the fire. "Sit with us," she said, "and let us share with you the teachings of the land and the spirits who dwell in it." Ezra sat by the fire, surrounded by the elders and warriors. The fire crackled in the center, casting a warm glow on their faces. The elder spoke of the sacred bond between the Lakota people and the land, how the earth provided for them and how they, in turn, cared for the earth. She spoke of the cycles of nature, of the buffalo herds that roamed the plains, and how every season brought with it lessons of survival, humility, and respect. As the fire burned low, the elder turned to Ezra and asked, "What do you know of the land, of its true power?" Ezra paused, uncertain of how to answer. He had lived on this land his whole life, but he had never truly understood it, never seen it the way the Lakota did. "I've worked it," he said slowly. "I've fed my cattle, repaired the fences, and learned how to survive through the winters. But I've never seen it the way you do." The elder's eyes softened with understanding. "You have much to learn, but you are on the right path. To understand the land, you must first understand yourself, your place within it. Only then will you truly see the power of the earth." The conversation shifted from the land to the spirits of the ancestors, who the Lakota believed guided and protected them. The elder spoke of dreams, of visions, and how the spirits communicated through the natural world, through the animals, the wind, and even the changing seasons. Ezra listened intently, his mind beginning to open to a way of thinking he had never considered before. As the night wore on, the warriors played traditional songs on drums, and the camp came alive with music, dancing, and stories. Ezra was invited to join in, though at first he hesitated. But soon, he found himself caught up in the rhythm of the drumbeats, moving in time with the dancers. It wasn't a celebration of the past alone, it was a celebration of life, of connection, of community. For the first time since he had inherited the ranch, Ezra felt a deep, undeniable connection to the world around him. It wasn't just the land. He felt connected to the people, to the animals, and to something larger than himself. The isolation that had once seemed so natural now felt unnatural, and he understood, more clearly than ever, that he was part of something greater. Ezra spent 3 days at the winter camp, learning from the Lakota elders, joining in their rituals, and gaining insights into the deep, spiritual relationship they had with the land. He learned to listen to the whispers of the wind, to read the signs in the sky, and to understand the delicate balance between the people and the earth that sustained them. On the 3rd day, as he prepared to leave, Standing Bear approached him. There was a solemnity in the chief's expression that made Ezra pause. "You have learned much," Standing Bear said, his voice low and steady. "But this is only the beginning. The land will always teach you, if you are willing to learn. Your father understood that, in his way, but there is more to this place than cattle and fences. This land holds wisdom, wisdom that is shared through the generations." Ezra nodded, feeling the weight of the chief's words. He had come here as a stranger, an outsider, but he was leaving with a deeper understanding of the world and his place in it. Standing Bear smiled, a rare and gentle expression that softened his features. "You are welcome here, always. Your ranch is part of this land, just as we are. If you ever need guidance, you need only ask." As Ezra mounted Bell and prepared to leave the winter camp, he looked back one last time. The camp was alive with the sound of the warriors singing, the air filled with the warmth of the fire and the strength of the Lakota people. He had found something here, something that had eluded him for years, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. And when he returned to his ranch, Ezra knew that it was no longer just his father's legacy he was tending to. It was a part of a larger story, a shared connection between all people and the land they called home. The ranch was no longer just about survival. It was about respect, about community, and about understanding the deeper truths that held the world together. As he worked the land, he could hear the whispers of the spirits, the lessons of the Lakota elders echoing in his mind. And in that quiet, sacred space, Ezra knew that he had finally found his place in the world.